I made a face, but I don't like sewing. Why shouldn't I read and write? The boys all do. Hatshepsut put his hand on my shoulder. Shh, Mirette, he said. I bent my head. I knew I shouldn't have spoken like that to Great Aunt Hatshepsut. Girls don't need to read and write, said Great Aunt Hatshepsut. No use to anyone. Reading and writing. My father sat up. Now, you can't say that to a scribe's family, my dear Aunt Mirette, he said. Get your great aunt a cool drink. I beckoned to our little maid. Mother leaned over to show Great Aunt Hatshepsut her sewing. Is the color too bright, do you think? She said. Mother and father were trying to make Great Aunt Hatshepsut forget about me, but Great Aunt Hatshepsut knew it. She gave me a sharp look as the maid poured her a drink. I knew my father would never hurt Great Aunt Hatshepsut's feelings. She had been kind to him when his own mother had died, when he was just a little boy. Now that Great Aunt Hatshepsut was old, she had come to live with us. I often wished she hadn't. My father was still talking to her. Mirette's a clever girl, he said. There's no reason why Hatshepsut shouldn't teach her a little. Great Aunt Hatshepsut glared at him. As long as it doesn't take too much time from helping her mother, he said quickly. I'd like to go to school, I said, like Nefer. To a woman as king. There was a great silence. Nefer stared at me, his mouth wide open. He'd just started school, and he didn't like it. My father frowned at me. No one really thought I meant what I'd said, because no girls went to school. In fact, there were no schools for girls. But now Great Aunt Hatshepsut would go on for hours about what girls should and shouldn't do. Everyone sighed. Great Aunt Hatshepsut grumbled on and on. Never heard of such a thing. Girl going to school. Girls knew what was good for them in my day. But then she said something that made everyone sit up straight. But how can you expect girls to be girls when you have a woman taking over as pharaoh? She asked. A woman on the throne of Egypt? Why, she even wears the clothes of a king. It's not right. Even though we were in our own house, with high walls around us and no one near, Mother, Father, and Hatshepsut looked around worried. That hadn't been a wise thing to say. Who knew who might have heard? My dear aunt, said Father, I know you'd never say that to anyone outside this house. Great Aunt Hatshepsut knew she'd gone too far. She knew she'd upset my father. She patted his hand. Don't worry, she said. I know when to keep quiet. Then she yawned. I think I'll have a little nap now, she said. She closed her eyes. Mother went back to her sewing. Father went back to dozing. Hatshepsut picked up the piece of pottery I was learning to read with, and we went back to the lesson, but the peaceful afternoon was spoiled. I knew what they were worried about. Even I knew about the woman who'd become king. Her name was Hatshepsut. If it was impossible in Egypt for a girl to go to school, it was very nearly impossible for a woman to be pharaoh. Sometimes, just sometimes, if a king died and his son was very young, a woman might rule until the son grew up. But that didn't happen very often. It had happened some years ago, though. The pharaoh, Thutmose II, had died. He had been married to Hatshepsut. He also had a son from a different wife. The boy, also called Thutmose, was very young when his father died, so it was decided Thutmose's stepmother, Hatshepsut, should rule until he was older. But when the boy grew up, Hatshepsut did not step aside. Instead, she named herself Pharaoh, and she ruled as a man would, as king of Egypt. This had never happened before, and many people in Egypt were unhappy about it. But Hatshepsut had powerful men helping her. One of them was the chief steward, Senmut. Nobody was brave enough to fight these men, and, as time went on, Many people didn't want to. Hatshepsut's rule was peaceful. She did not take Egypt to war. She built beautiful temples. She sent ships to bring strange and wonderful things back from far away, although some people muttered and plotted against her. Most were happy to live in peace. My family, apart from Great Aunt Aset, of course, was happy to let Hatshepsut rule and call herself King of Egypt. My father, and now Setep too, had important jobs as scribes in the new temple that Hatshepsut was building. We had a comfortable house, lots to eat, clothes and jewelry to wear, and servants to work for us. Only one thing made me unhappy. 3. Poor Nefer. What made me unhappy was that I really wanted to learn to read and write properly, not just the little bits that Setep taught me when he had time. What I really wanted was to go to school, but there were no schools for girls.
On the next slide, you're going to answer, how does the treatment of girls in this story differ from the treatment of girls in our society today?